Welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone is feeling refreshed and energized. Wait, Asta, what are you doing?
One sec, I'm trying to unlock this device, but the facial recognition is just not working.
It's quite
I have to put my
interesting.
password.
It's quite interesting for it to happen right now because up next we actually have designing inclusive technologies, and unfortunately, today a lot of facial recognition softwares are very biased.
Yes, definitely, Ayana. This is kind of reminding me of that paper that we read, right?
Yes, and I think we should definitely let others know as well. So for everyone's benefit, this paper co-authored by Smriti Parshira and Gaurav Jain in December 2021 tested the face detection and face analysis functions of 4 commercial facial processing tools on datasets of Indians. And believe it or not, they found that the gender classification error rate for Indian female faces is consistently higher compared to that of males, and a complete inability to correctly classify persons of belonging to a third gender altogether.
That's really troubling, Ayan. And it's not just gender, right? Technology is biased in so many different ways. When it comes to skin, for example, automatic dispensers and faucets sometimes can't even detect dark skin.
Yeah, undoubtedly, and it's so important for design to train technologies with representative data sets so that it ensures that there's inclusion.
Yeah. And this is just one of the reasons today's panel is going to delve into the principles of design that must be ingrained while we develop technology. What are the key strategies, standards, and tools that can help us rectify these inclusivity bugs?
Yeah, that's so important to understand. And alongside that, the panel will also be examining that digital design itself, which technology isn't by default a one-size-fits-all, and rather it must consciously make adjustments and to be flexible to cater to the varied requirements of each and every user.
And apart from just making these adjustments, how can organizations leverage technology and design by itself to craft inclusive experiences for all? From accessible websites and applications to the importance of inclusive design and digital content, right? And especially the utilization of assistive technologies, today's panel is really going to dig deep.
Yeah, and after all, inclusivity isn't just about checking off the boxes, right? But it's about ensuring that each and every individual feels valued and empowered by the technology that they use and interact.
Very true. So without further ado, let's please welcome on stage our panelists. NISHA Gopinath, Vice President HR from IBM, Dr. SARAYU Natarajan, founder of Aapti Institute, and VIDYA Venkataramani, Executive Global Advanced Design Tools and Advanced Technology Sciences from GE Aerospace.
Let's please have a round of applause and welcome them on stage.
All right, good morning everybody. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here with my co-panelists. And we have a number of things that we would like to cover in this session. The first, a few things that came to my mind as I was thinking about this panel was how technology has changed the way we work, within our enterprises that we work in our daily lives as well. It has really decreased the divide that you see between, for example, somebody who's visually impaired is still, really be able to use a screen reader or a speech recognition, a text to, and so on, and make it easy for them. You have captioning, you have smart assisted devices, voice-activated home automation systems, etc. And I just thought I'll bring it closer home to our talent management that we have within organizations. And I'll touch upon a little bit about how it really helps when it comes to, maybe I'll just stand up so it's easier for me. When it comes to talent attraction, can we see? Yeah. In the whole talent management life cycle, when it comes to talent attraction, talent retention, communication, and really the community building. And touch upon a few tools that we use that makes the bias less, when you talk about it. So when it comes to a talent attraction perspective, there are a few things that we use which helps. For example, there are tools that we use like a hacker rank, so there is no bias. You really don't know the candidate that who's giving the interview. A My Staffing Advisor, which will help you understand which candidate is really suitable for a job position that you have open. Or you talk about a Watson Assistant, which will tell you how do you really match the compensation. The pay divide is something that we see, right? The pay inequity in the market. Especially when it comes to candidates who are coming from the market, we see that, and we have to make a significant investment to really bridge the gap. So here, compensation decisions are made by the tool without really looking at the gender, the background, really looking at the skills at which you are hiring the candidate for. We also have the same thing applied when we do pay revisions for our employees. So when you say pay revisions, there is a cognitive tool which will help our managers make pay decisions based on skills, based on the market benchmarking, etc. So the individual really doesn't come into the picture there. It's more about the skills that are in play. You know, how critical is that skill? How critical is that individual's performance, and so on. Taking it to the next level when it comes to learning, when it comes to careers, when it comes to skills. That's how you really retain your people, right? So, for example, if I'm an HR professional, I would open my learning website and it would tell me, these are the sessions that I should be doing. And we also use the learning platform to ensure we train our people when it comes to sessions like unconscious bias. That's something that we all grapple a lot with, right? Because, you know, the backgrounds that we come from, the backgrounds that we are all, so that's one. And then also matching your guides. Your guides is a platform that is being used where your coach is being matched to the mentees. So, you know, again, you're not choosing somebody based on certain preferences. It is an automated matching system based on the skills, the expertise that will help you grow your career. And same with your career, and so on and so forth. So personalized learning, skill inference. So we do use this, you know, all over. But, and I just want to also talk about the last point, which is about how do you really build an inclusive community? An inclusive, so we all know during the pandemic time, right? People said, you know, we can work from home, it's fine. So now we're trying to bring people back to office and everybody's like, technology is working well. Why are you calling you HR people? Why are you calling us back to office? And technology is working well, right? But then we always talk about some of these in-person interactions which helps. But at the same time, technology has played a big role when it comes to bringing people together as communities. It could be dashboards that would help us to understand, you know, who's coming to office. It could be dashboards that would help us to understand what are some of the representations of our employee resource groups that we have, so on and so forth. So I just want to say, you know, technology has played a big role in the way we look at talent programs within our organization. However, I still feel we have a long way to go, not just within organizations, but even outside the organizations. Because if you look at people who are, you know, disabled children, the number of children that we have in schools, and you know, I lived in the US for a few years, and I saw the kind of accommodations that we give the children there, which is talking at the table earlier. You know, if you have somebody who's probably has a weakness on one side, the kind of keyboards that we have in our country is just for people, everybody, right? I mean, you don't have those kind of accommodations. There, the student, the counselor, the teacher would all sit together and really understand what are the kind of accommodations that you require. And that's what we need to carry to the workplace as well. Because if you look at a study that the WHO has done, even in workplaces, people who are differently abled are not feeling or not advancing at the pace at which others would, which is quite unfortunate, right? With all of this technology advancements, we are still not able to give a level playing field. And that's, I think, the responsibility of each one of us sitting in this room to see how can we make that equitable? How can we ensure that we give them a level playing field so that they also thrive in today's environment? It's not just about tools, but I always say, you know, as an organization, you can do any number of policies, any number of programs, but if people don't feel it, if they don't believe that they matter, it really doesn't matter. You know, organization can do as many things as you want, but that's what's important. And the last point I want to touch upon before I pass on to my co-panelists is, this is an important one when it comes to, especially with AI. We all talk about artificial intelligence today, but you know, as policymakers, as people who are responsible, and every organization is on this bandwagon, right? I mean, we have to get this right. We have to use tools. But there are certain things that we need to keep in consideration as we work on AI. One is fairness, because as developers work on some of these models, we need to ensure that certain biases that they carry, certain preconceived notions that they carry are not being built into the system. And that's why those checks and balances and augmenting human intervention when we work on these tools is very important. The second thing is explainability. If somebody would ask, why did you make that decision? Why did you choose that candidate versus somebody else? There should be a fair, explainable answer that each one of us in the room should be able to give, even if we are using the AI system. The third is robustness. The robustness, when I say against manipulation, ensuring that there are no security breach, there are no data breach, there is no privacy breach to ensure that PI, SPI, sensitive personal information is being protected. So to kind of summarize, I would like to say it's our responsibility as everybody in the room here to ensure that as we embark on this journey with technology, we should not be missing some of these points and make it an inclusive environment for all our colleagues here. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to SARAYU.
Am I audible? Oh, it works very well. Thank you very much. Thanks for the lovely introduction, and it was a fantastic lesson. I'm going to focus on something slightly different than what NISHA spoke about. I'm going to talk about the platform gig economy. I know Dr. Vasanthi in the previous panel, and the previous panel had teed up some of those discussions as well, but that's where I'm going to anchor my remarks. The gig economy, or the platform gig economy, has been a significant component of India's job growth story. It employs, estimates vary, but it employs ranging from the hundreds of thousands of people to millions, because very many aspects of the gig economy are often invisible, and therein in some ways lies the problem of inclusion. Specifically, this discussion will focus on women's experiences. I'm wary of the gender binary, of course, but when I use women, I hope to speak to some of the experiences beyond the binary framing of gender. The reason to pay attention to gender in the context of inclusion is because women's experiences have two dimensions by which they are different or more significant. One is that women might have very specific experiences that cis-het men don't necessarily have in their engagement with work or their engagement with platforms. The second is that the experience itself may be exaggerated, particularly harms. So it's not bad, it's worse for women. And this could be in the nature of the harm experienced, or the remedy that is available may be mediated or constrained for any specific reason, which is that women cannot access a grievance redressal system because they're prevented from doing so. In certain instances, may not have the capacity to do so. So experiences might be specific, they might be exaggerated, and in some instances, they might be both. I'll talk very briefly about some research that we did on the platform gig economy that looked at women's experiences on platforms vis-a-vis men. And just very quickly, the methodology of the study was a deep qualitative research where we spoke to platform workers who are on personal services companies such as Urban Company and a few others, as well as men who are on ride-hail platforms. And the idea was to understand a sectoral difference, but that started to fade away, but to also understand the gender difference. There are three big dimensions, and all of these dimensions fall within the broader framework of specific experiences or exaggerated ones. Health and safety. Women who are on platforms, particularly in personal services companies, are doing work in other people's houses, often not visible, not just because they're women, but also because these sites are cloistered, covered up. So health and safety is a notable concern. And there are several examples of women who've been to customers' houses, have had horrible experiences with other people, coming in instances of sexual abuse, and then not being able to report or find ways to talk about it, mainly because it's either not believed or not seen. So that's a specific as well as an exaggerated experience that women encounter. The second is slightly more difficult to articulate, but it's the notion of emotional labor and the expectation. Some of it comes from the nature of the job, which is that a salon worker is expected to engage and behave differently than a person who's driving you from place A to place B. The other is, of course, the gendered expectation of women being nicer, kinder, sweeter, I don't even know what, but the expectations of women to be a certain way. Smiling, we heard that a lot from several of the workers that we interviewed. So the expectation of emotional labor on platform-mediated work, where you don't have a job, where you don't really have a system of feedback, this emotional labor can be debilitating because you don't know if you're doing enough. That's not to say that men on these platforms do not have similar experiences, but the gendered expectation intersecting with the type of work creates a specific pattern of expectations around emotional labor. The third is rating and surveillance, and the two are tied together to emotional labor as well as health and safety. Because rating is very often something that is very powerful and in the hands of the customer. There is a mutual rating process, but we discovered in a workshop that we did where we asked both drivers on ride-hail platforms and several people to come and attend. And then we said, you please put your rating on the Uber app on a board. And we did know what the internal cutoff within platforms was to exclude a person from being a driver. So we drew a line, and whereas it's not the same for customers. So several customers have ratings in the 3s and the early 4s who have not even received a single warning from several platforms. So the varying or the power imbalance in the rating system can sometimes negatively affect women, especially if you intersect it with questions of emotional labor as well as questions of health and safety. And the rating is also in that way arbitrary because it is solely personal. It is my experience of that particular transaction, and so doesn't necessarily reflect or in any way measure or speak to the competence of this person. So even if you want to build a future sort of skills passport mechanism around some of the work that is done on platforms, it might not be possible to do so because it's arbitrary ratings. So thinking about that, I think, becomes critical in the broader conversation around inclusion and design. Now, how does one think about remediation or tackle the tricky problem of designing around some of these? I do not have some grand solutions to offer. All I can talk about is a few experiences that we've had in thinking about the design of digital systems, and definitely hope to see that as a part of a process. I use a simple framework of thinking about things, which is awareness. So do women, or are there efforts that can be made to enhance awareness about issues or solutions that exist? Second, access to those solutions, so thinking more deeply about the question of access itself. So how is access mediated? And the last is enabling the actual use. Maybe I'll start with the last first. The two compeers who introduced this session actually touched upon something we encounter so much in our work with ride-hail workers, which is the facial recognition doesn't work sometimes if you've had a haircut. It's a problem with Indian skin tones, and Smriti's research is something that is an everyday lived experience, not one that is a research paper, but something that we see. But another hidden dimension to this is that several logins for platform work rely on email and passwords. And just as much as there is talk about India having leapfrogged the email generation, gone directly to instant messaging and WhatsApp and mobile phones, email logins make no sense. And we've had to have conversations about shifting to OTP-based logins. So the notion of use and the assumptions that very often are made in design about capabilities for use is something to unpack and think about as to what real and existing capabilities are. I mean, I know this is not a gendered specific question, but one worth thinking about. The second one is the question of access. And again, access is about the access to the system itself. very often we have learned that women's access to digital systems is mediated, which is that they lean on somebody else to help them. It could be a younger person in the house, it could be a shared mobile that they are all using and they ask somebody else. Younger male relatives are frequently relied upon to mediate access, and I will confess that I also lean on my son to help me use my computer and phone. But jokes apart, there's a genuine question about how women's access to systems generally happens. And thinking about building the capacities of intermediaries, and we did some work with an ID system outside of India, much like our Aadhaar, and we found that training local workers, community workers with NGOs, enabling them to help women get on the system was significantly helpful, increase the rates of enrollment, increase rates of confidence. The last, of course, is awareness itself. One part of it is communication, but to my mind, the big question around awareness is thinking about the systemic barriers that inhibit awareness, which is often that the digital devices are shared. Even access to knowledge is mediated by patriarchal structures, which is, women should not watch TV because, I don't know, they'll do bad things. So thinking about the problem of awareness as a societal one. And so we did some work on bringing young women on board to be social champions, which is that they would take up local problems and try and solve them on their own. And very many of the young women that we spoke to came back to us with feedback saying, don't just tell us what to do, we know very well, but please also talk to our parents. And so what we did was put in place a system where the organization that we were working with communicated on a daily basis with parents, either through updates. And I'm conscious of what this entails because it shouldn't be paternalism on the part of the organization, etc. All those balances apart, what that helped in doing was clear some of the doubts about what this work was. I hope these examples, and these are examples from different domains that we worked in, but the notion of design is one that has to be thought through the entire process, the entire value chain of technology use, as well as one that has to be iterative, because being able to come back to some of the efforts or the initiatives, see whether they're working, is also critical. I'll pause here and hand back to Nisha, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
I'd like to hear from you now.
Yeah, thanks, SARAYU. That was, a second dimension around inclusion, how we can, think of it from the perspective of bringing technology to solve some of these challenges. I'm going to try to come at it from a third dimension. As was, mentioned in the introduction, I'm from GE Aerospace, and at GE Aerospace, our, purpose statement is to invent the future of flight, lift people up, and bring them home safely. And we say it last, but it's the most important thing to bring them home safely. So when we think about the accountability, the responsibility that each and every engineer holds in the hands is to bring every passenger home safely so that they can go to do what they got on that flight for. So that's critical to what we do, and I want to bring the perspective of why inclusion is important in the way we build products and how we can use technology to help do this in a better way. So let me frame the problem a little bit. Today, if you look at how GE Aerospace operates, a large fraction of our engineering workforce sits outside, the headquarters where we are located, and therefore making sure that we have an environment where all engineers are able to participate in problem solving, in root cause investigations and other such things. It's extremely critical because the answers don't lie at HQ. The answers lie in several other places. The second piece, maybe as a context setting, is if you look at a part, it's an engine has come to a shop for an overhaul. A part has an issue. That defect has to get routed then to global engineers who then have to go and look at, how do I solve this problem? So while I won't talk about how we, create inclusive products, how are we using technology to actually solve some of these problems so that we can build robust products and ensure the safety of the product. So one of the examples I wanted to share is the aerospace industry is a very high-skill, knowledge-based industry where you need to understand a lot of engineering, and then there's a lot of legacy information, learnings from the field that you only learn through experience, being in the field for many years. So a lot of information flows through documentation in what could be referred to as our design practices. And previously, if I just rewind to 15, 20 years ago, if somebody in Bangalore sitting had to solve a problem or do an analysis, we would be sent like a snapshot of the sheet within the design practice saying, here is how you do the analysis. Can you do this? Can you give us the results from this? I'm very happy to say we've evolved to this place where today all of our design practices reside in a global, IT infrastructure. And if I add the next dimension of complexity, within those design practices, there's control technology, stuff that only the US military can see, stuff that the US military can see, other technologies that are specific to trade secrets that we own that can only be shared with specific engineers on the ground. And all of this is controlled within that IT infrastructure so that any engineer who is in Bangalore, is in Munich, in one of our technology centers anywhere, can go into the system and say, and interrogate, how do I do this design? I want to learn how to do it. And everything that is relevant and accessible to this individual is now available online for them to read, learn, and then train themselves about it. So that was an example that I want to share about how we are using technology to democratize this information and knowledge base that we have so that we can bring engineers up to speed. The second dimension that I wanted to talk about was around problem solving. So, once you have the knowledge, I said a lot of this is, around how we solve problems as a global team. So today, the other example that I wanted to share is of this, when an engine comes to a shop, they disassemble this engine, a part comes out, and then let's say you see a nick or you see something on the part that should not exist. In the past, it had to be an engineer who went in there to actually go look at this part, do some sort of an assessment, a disposition, and tell us how to move forward. Today, we've transformed the way using technology to be able to upload all of this in a way that the relevant individuals get to see it, and then they're able to provide the disposition remotely, and then an engineer in a shop can then take an action. And the second piece of problem solving that I want to highlight, which is not necessarily a digital or a technology-enabled solution, but it is partly enabled by technology, is problems are not solved by one person in such a complex system, because this part connects to another part through a bolt, and then that has an impact because of a thermal effect, because of a mechanical effect, or a materials effect. And no one individual is capable of saying, this is what we should do. How do we work as a multidisciplinary team to actually solve this problem is something we resolve through technology. Whenever there is a root cause investigation, a cross-section of multidisciplines are put together as a problem resolution team. And then today, digital technology, whether it's Teams, chats, emails, all of these come into play to help us problem solve this real time across the globe. So these were some, context that I wanted to provide, in a complex systems level product like we're building today, where safety is of utmost importance. Why is inclusion important? Because, like I said, the problems and the solutions don't reside with one individual. And secondly, you need technology to actually enable working of these teams so that we can bring them home safely. So with that, I'll hand it back to NISHA.
Thank you. Great example, SARAYU and Vidya. One side we heard about all the gig workers and the challenges and how we work through that. Other side we heard about the high-tech aerospace and in terms of what we do, making it more inclusive. I thought I'll ask both of our panelists a few questions here, one or two questions, and then we'll open it up for any questions that any of you would have. So my first question is to Vidya. I think, Vidya, you covered some part of it in what you just spoke. But how can inclusion be integrated into the design process of the work you do in the aerospace technology to ensure that products and services are accessible to a diverse range of users?
Yeah, sure. More recently, and if you've been reading the news on how our not so new but relatively new CEO in the last 3 to 4 years, Larry Culp, has been bringing around a transformation using lean in the way we operate as a business. And the foundational element for anybody who's familiar with lean will nod with me is respect for people. And it truly comes as a foundational tenet of inclusion in my mind. Back to my point, problems are not solved by one individual, and the entire ecosystem of engineers today are working to solve the operator's problem on the ground. There's an operator who's either assembling an engine today, or they've seen something that does not seem okay on an engine that came into a shop. How are we going to help that operator make a decision so that we can fly the product safely? So, the use of lean as the foundation of how we do, as a culture that we build within our company, is helping us drive inclusion at a totally different level. And the second piece is within lean, the concept of improvement comes through, the entire value chain of, people who add to the product coming together and solving the problem. So when we do a Kaizen, if there is a part that needs, the turnaround to be improved, it's not just the engineer or the manufacturing engineer who's going to sit and solve the problem. It's everybody from sourcing, from supply chain, from manufacturing, from engineering, maybe somebody even who's at the field, deploying that part, all coming together to understand how do we solve that problem. So I look at inclusion from that dimension of everybody needs to get together to understand. All the right stakeholders need to get together to understand how we solve that problem. And today we're doing that through lean problem solving.
Yeah, respect for individuals, what you spoke, and then the entire ecosystem coming together to solve a problem, making it truly inclusive. That's a great example. Thank you. Sarayu, the next question is to you. Can you share some of the gendered experiences of women on digital platforms vis-a-vis men? And how can we navigate through these roadblocks to ensure inclusivity of women in the platform economy?
Thank you. I do think I did tackle some of the questions around specific experiences, and I think what would be critical to remember in thinking about women's experiences on platform, particularly in seeking work, is paying attention both to the specific experience that they have and ones where their harm is very significantly enhanced. I think the other dimension to pay attention to here is the one around the sector of work, because each area and domain has very specific idiosyncratic experiences. So for example, personal services create a great amount of risk because of the fact that women have to go to somebody else's house and work. Whereas data annotation and labeling present barriers of their own sort, data annotation being the kind of work done by very often women to label data sets for the creation of generative AI. So that kind of work presents its own barriers. May not be a health and safety risk in the classic way that we understand it, but concerns around access to assets. So you need a phone or a laptop to be able to do this work, and very often women may not have these systems. So that's one where they're almost prohibited, and then you have to find a way or a system to enable women to do it. Or often, because such work is prescribed by the community, they do it in secret. So that would be definitely something to think about. I think in terms of solutions, maybe thinking about both systems as well as processes, systems such as robust grievance redressal systems, as well as thinking about the transition from online harms to offline harms, which is that you find a job online, but then the hurt happens offline, which is in somebody's house or something of that sort. Those kind of solutions and systems need to be put in place to ensure that women have a safe work experience, as well as putting in place processes to ensure that it's iterative and consultative, so that you're not coming up with ideas without paying attention to the dynamics on the ground as well. So I'll pause here and hope for some questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarayu. That's very insightful. And I think from a gender perspective, probably we have come a long way. But maybe when you look at people who are disabled, visually impaired, that's maybe where we need some more work to do. Is the experience the same for them to do shopping, to book a flight ticket, and so on? There's some work happening on that for sure. Recently there was an article that IBM has partnered with American Express, where the traveler experience for differently abled people would be, so they will be intuitively able to book tickets and so on, but still a long, long way to go. It's just a pilot, but thank you for that. I just have one question more that I'm going to ask both of you. What are some of the trends or opportunities you foresee in inclusive design? Vidya, first to you.
Sure. I think, I'll probably be sounding like I'm repeating the same thing, but it's extremely important for us in our industry is safety. Safety first is extremely important in the aerospace industry. And from an inclusivity perspective, one of the trends that I want to highlight is around psychological safety. And the reason I'm bringing it from an inclusion perspective is a problem can surface from anywhere. Any engineer, or an operator in a shop can raise their hand and say, I think there is a problem with this design, with this part, and I want to stop the line. I want to stop this for us to spend time and understand what is happening here. Because, a gap in our psychological safety, our ability to actually listen to different perspectives and say, we are good to go or this has to stop, is extremely important so that events, that happen out in the field are not there, right? So one of the biggest trends I'm seeing in the aerospace industry, especially commercial aviation, is driving the culture of speaking up, normalizing the fact that anybody, anywhere can say that this is not okay, and then everybody is in service of that mission of bringing them home safely. So I leave with that.
Anybody can speak up. Yeah. Sure. I just want to hear Sarayu's perspective because we didn't get an opportunity to hear from Sarayu on some of the trends or opportunities that you see in design, and then we'll take the questions.
This first, the second, this third.
Thank you. I can keep it very quick. I think a couple of trends. One is the reliance on techno-legal mechanisms or techno-policy mechanisms for inclusion. Very often it is thought that inclusion sits outside the technical process itself, whereas the careful design of technological systems can actually enhance inclusion. I think the paradox, of course, is what happened with AI, Google's Gemini this morning or over the last day or two, where the AI has been very ineffectively producing wrong output, often to the, so being careful about the use of techno-legal solutions, but thinking of those kind of mechanisms. The other, of course, I think is offline mediation. Increasingly, we're seeing that access to technical systems, thinking about who can support, supported and mediated access is something, particularly with work that we see some of. I'll pause here and over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Sarayu. We've received a few questions from the audience. We have about 3 of them. I'll just read it out and any one of us can take it. Why do we still not have as many women as we would like as participants in gender-neutral roles? I also read recently about not having enough women on the board as well, right? And that is a requirement. And especially in the gig economy. Why are we failing as a system? I can give my perspective on this, and I think in any organization, as you see that drop in the percentage, right? We all talk about that as you move to senior roles. But it's the support that we give as a society, as a system, that would help us enable that we have more participation from both genders in some of these roles. There are NGOs that are working to train. There are NGOs like Aspire for Her, VAs, and so on, and many, many such organizations. And each of us can actually partner with them, be mentors for people who would like to take up these roles. And in fact, personally, I am doing something on women on boards, and that's why I kind of raised it. And Aspire for Her is helping build more women in board positions because we don't have enough women who will bring that diverse perspective. And we have seen how profitable these are. I mean, all of us in this room know that. So that's my response. Any of you would like to chime in?
I'm happy to chime in with a very small examples pertaining to the gig economy. We asked some years ago the question of why don't women become ride-hail drivers? And there are, of course, community organizations working to bring women onto platforms, support them with training, etc. But one of the most common points of feedback that we heard, aside from the health and safety concern, which is understandable in the kind of society that we live in, was actually that we do not have the ability to make the down payment to buy the car, which is a solvable and solvable problem. But second, that women often have caregiving responsibilities which do not follow a systematic pattern during the day. So you'll have to come, go, drop kids to school, come back. There is a volatility to the day, sometimes mostly mediated by caregiving responsibilities. Now, how do you think about work around that? And it's not a problem that only the gig economy faces. I think it's one that very many women who want to join the workforce experience, and that was the simple reason. So I don't know if I have the solution, but at least this is what we learned empirically to be the reason.
If I may just add, because I had a perspective to share on this one about women in senior roles. I think the one point I wanted to make was that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to help women get into senior roles. And it's just that sometimes there is a crossroads of multiple things in life that come as women get into senior roles that come in the way of them being able to pursue that. And I wanted to leave it on a personal note, and that's why I took the stage to answer this question is, I'm not highly senior in GE Aerospace, but I am a leader of leaders at the company. And today I'm actually in a part-time work arrangement because I need to take care of some personal work for my family. And GE Aerospace didn't have a solution for it, but we found a solution for it, just for me. And therefore, I wanted to share that we have to speak up and ask for what we want. And maybe the solution does exist out there, but it's not yet been found. So we should also do our part in,
and quitting is not the answer, right? That's the most easiest thing to do when we are there.
Yeah.
Okay, any of you would like to take the next question?
Yeah. So maybe I can read this out and then, we can share our thoughts. As we are from a manufacturing company and this person's from Toyota Kirloskar, we strongly believe in TPS and observe thoroughly is our fourth value of our company. Now, if AI is going to replace our fourth value, I'm just concerned about employee relation. Can you please explain more on that? Maybe I can just share, a perspective, and this is not something that's, researched or anything. I think that the evolution of AI has to be in stages. Today we've unlocked that there is potential in AI, but to fast forward and go to AIs for all decisions, I don't think we are in that stage. So I think human-assisted AI, where AI is giving, recommendations, statistical information or model-based information on what is a recommendation for what we need to do, is probably the place we are in today. And employee relations, the human-to-human connect is something that I don't think today we can replace using AI.
You answered it, that's right. It's human-augmented employee relations, I would say. It's not going to be completely taken over by AI. There are certain functions which cannot be, and I would say some parts of it. The other day I was reading about, can legal be completely AI? I'm not too sure. Okay. All right, Sari, would you like to take the
very
next
quickly
question?
Because I think we're at time. I'll read out the questions very quickly and then try and answer them. How would you look at ethical and emotional labor crossroads with technology? Second, while we are sensitizing people on POSH, deep fake grows exponentially. Third, with platforms like Ola, Uber, etc., who ensures that the drivers are not exploited emotionally and psychologically? The first and the third questions seem related to each other. I don't have an answer. I think that technology enables the amplification of the challenge around emotional labor. It doesn't necessarily create a new problem. And therefore, having said that, thinking about what technology amplifies, which is the worst parts of human intent, governing and putting guardrails in place for that might be the most useful. The second one on POSH and deepfakes, I don't know if it's necessarily a paradox between the two, but I do think deepfakes present a specific set of concerns around work, which relate to sort of employee disputes and concerns that might arise in the workplace. I know that the state is, as a broader measure, taking efforts to regulate the use of deepfake technologies, but the role of deepfakes in work, it's not just a POSH, I mean, not that they're mutually exclusive, but POSH frameworks for gender relations in the workplace do need to take into account what technology enables in terms of access, harassment, and employee relations. So just as texting and instant messaging posed a problem, deepfake adds a layer to it. So thinking about that might be useful. I'll just pause.
Thank you. So we're almost about time. Thank you for being such a great patient audience here. We did cover and talk about the talent management principles, being fair, ethical AI. We talked about some of the practices we have in the gig workers to the aerospace areas and so on. So it kind of varies, each panelist coming from different perspective. And I personally believe, by embracing tech, we can create an inclusive work environment and future, and an ecosystem for everybody here. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panel. Another round of applause, everyone.
Yeah, for such an informative, in-depth and riveting session indeed.
Truly. And really interesting because the last question that somebody asked was extremely relevant to our next session.